But Eugene, with the time that we have left here, I think it's really important to talk a little bit, at least for the next few minutes, about the unprecedented Iranian retaliation we saw on Israel this week. It took everybody by surprise, I think, because we've been waiting for quite some time for Iran to respond, as it said, at a time and place of its choosing, for Israel's assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, which was a direct attack on Iranian soil. And that comes after so many provocations over the last year. And so we saw Iran fire 180 ballistic missiles, at least, at Israel. Many of them made impact. Of course, the American administration officials tried to downplay it, calling it ineffectual, probably to try to stave off having to respond more harshly. But we are expecting an Israeli response. It's expected the Israelis will hit perhaps Iranian oil facilities. The U.S. is saying we're telling them not to hit nuclear facilities, but the Israelis are promising to maybe do that. So I guess my question for you is, in this unprecedented moment that we're in, it's a very dangerous moment that, of course, Israel has led us to, and as well as the Americans. What's going to happen next here?
Wow. Okay. Well, you're really putting me in the hot seat. What's going to happen next?
Eugene, I mean, predict.
Yes. This is it. This is go to Vegas with this. I mean, it's tough to say exactly what's going to happen next, but I think it's more than fair for people to think that it's expanding. I mean, one of the factors about this entire piece that I think, people have maybe forgotten or are willfully ignorant about is the broader context of the Israeli project, right? Because, this is sort of what we're asking. And I think, it's hard to put ourselves back in that sort of pre-October 7th time. But if we put ourselves back in that moment, we can remember that many people were asking, well, how far can this go? Because you had the Israeli government, which was pushing forward with the normalization along with the United States, but was, seizing more land than ever before in the West Bank, obviously putting more and more pressure on Gaza. I mean, you had this sort of Likud party style one-state solution. In fact, you might remember very well, Rania, many commentators, even Israeli commentators, were saying that this was the state of affairs prior to October 7th, that there already was a one-state solution. It was the Israeli one-state solution of apartheid and ethnic cleansing from the river to the sea from their perspective. And certainly in the context of that sort of broader perspective, especially coming from the Likud party and these other far-right parties, has been a desire not only to displace as many Palestinians as possible, but also to expand the borders of Israel. They've actually never defined their borders because there is a deeper movement in these far-right areas that want to have a greater Israel. Some of them even think it should extend all the way up to Iraq, for instance, all of Lebanon, big chunks of Syria. If you look at the IDF, there's some of the IDF soldiers actually have a patch of this sort of like the military patch with a map that's supposed to be the map of Israel, of the greater Israel. It's got the Sinai in it. It's got all these other areas in it. So I say all that to say, you don't want to see any of this happening, obviously. But insofar as Israel is demanding that its settler colonial project be allowed to exist, this is the ultimate outcome. And this is the exact same thing we saw with South Africa in Southern Africa. In 1978, when they decided to, invade Angola, they'd already taken over Namibia, the brutal attacks on the frontline states, the bombings of Zambia, the extreme dirty war that was waged against Mozambique. I mean, it's hard to even remind people, they'd build a well for a village that had never had good, clean running water in Renamo, this, trader group that was run by South Africa, along with South African commandos, would come in and then spike the well, poison the water, destroy the well, and destroy all the crops, and try to create a famine so that any positive post-colonial development in Mozambique was just being completely and totally destroyed at all times. I could go on and on here, but the context of it was basically this. You had a settler colonial project that was completely illegitimate in a region of the world in which the vast majority of people did not want it to be there. So at a certain point, there's a logic amongst these sorts of forces that the only way for them to succeed is to escalate. And that's why I raised this issue of the invasion of Angola in 1978, is that the thought process of the South Africans is, well, the only way for us to really survive is to escalate and to invade these other countries and to try to destroy all our enemies or, bully them into submission to buy ourselves more time for something that the billion people surrounding us don't want. And I think for the Israelis, it's a very similar circumstance. I think this is what brought Netanyahu really back into politics and has allowed him to dominate politics. I think we've seen from the Israeli culture since October 7th that I think I hate to say it, but it's true. The vast majority of people living there are 100% aware of what's going on. That nobody in the region wants this settler colonial occupation to continue, that increasingly people are getting frustrated, that the forces that are opposing them with arms are growing stronger because people are getting more frustrated with the fact that there is no justice for the Palestinians and there's complete and total impunity for Israel to launch their terroristic type bombings all across the region at any time and kill anyone, whoever they want. And I think they're seeing that ultimately the center can't hold, and that at a certain point, you have to fight. They were shocked because they're so racist, they didn't believe the Palestinians would ever fight back again. The Palestinians totally humiliated the so-called Israeli Defense Forces, very misnamed, on October 7th. Just completely humiliated them. And I think that shocked the Israelis into a momentum where they said we have to completely destroy anyone around us who possibly can offer resistance to this settler colonial project. And that could only bring us to the brink of huge regional war. And I think that's where we are right now. So people are trying to put the onus on Iran. Shocking to me. Absolutely shocking to me in the context of what's going on here. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that this Western created, sort of British, French created, and the US came in and jumped on it, system to try to divide and control the Arabs and the broader West Asia region, which is very rich, is undoubtedly collapsing because the cornerstone, the settler colonial occupation of Israel, was never sustainable, just like the settler colonial occupation of South Africa was never sustainable. It's collapsing under its own weight. And because instead of realizing that and saying, let's give justice to the Palestinians and let's promote, sovereignty in the broader region, nationalism in the broader region, development in the broader region, they're saying we're going to go to the brink to support Israel, which is taking us to the brink of this massive conflict. And I think it's terrible that this is where we are, but it's because Israel and the United States have been totally unwilling to entertain any proposal, even from their vassal states, like the Arab peace proposal in 2002. They won't entertain anything that could offer any justice to the Palestinians or the other Arab countries that are surrounding the region, and they're letting this settler colonial project pursue its own logic, which it really can only succeed because what are the only settler colonies that have succeeded, Rania? America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Now, what can we say about all those places? They completely and totally exterminated all the natives. So if you're a settler colonial project, that's the only way you can go. And that means the Palestinians, but it also means the Lebanese, it means the Syrians, and it really means the Jordanians and the Egyptians too, even though they've gotten them to bow down, those regimes there. But ultimately, they're also on the target list if they were ever to raise their head above the parapet ever again, and to some degree, even without it, in many different ways. So it's their own logic, but it's supported by imperialism.
Oh, I think that's all beautifully said. And what I'll add to that is just a couple things. And one is the Israelis actually, for the first time while we were doing our live stream, they used an F-16 to do an airstrike on Tulkarem, which is in the West Bank. And it's according to Al Jazeera, the first time an Israeli fighter jet has done an airstrike in the West Bank since the early 2000s.
Wow.
If I'm not mistaken. So that's a huge, they killed 14 people at a cafe the last I saw. So it was a massacre, an absolute massacre. So you have Israel doing genocide in Gaza for a year now with no end in sight. At this point, it's become so normal. We don't even see the details anymore or pay attention to them so much because the Israelis also are carrying out atrocities across the West Bank, ethnic cleansing across the West Bank, demolishing homes and neighborhoods every day across the West Bank, and now doing airstrikes, actual airstrikes with fighter jets. The Israelis are currently bombing Dahieh, the southern suburb of Beirut, which they've been bombing every single night for the last week. It's become a nightly routine, as Maya, who we had on earlier, mentioned, displacing over 1 million people in Lebanon, and they've started their ground invasion of Lebanon, where in the first 2 days, they've lost at least 27 people. I believe it was 10 yesterday, 17 today, according to Hezbollah. And the 10 they lost yesterday, by the way, which they admitted to losing, were a part of an elite unit that trained specifically to invade Lebanon. So I think they thought they were going to cakewalk into Lebanon. Obviously, they can carry out a lot of destruction. In fact, some people believe the Israelis are punishing civilians in Beirut every night as a result of their losses now in the attempted ground invasion. because they thought they were just going to waltz right in because they killed Hassan Nasrallah, killed the senior leadership of Hezbollah, not understanding that this is an organization that has been training its entire existence to fight off an Israeli invasion, and now it's doing exactly that. It stands to be seen how this will continue in the coming days. But all that's to say, Israel is demonstrated once again to the world with these Iranian missile strikes, as well as its failures so far in Lebanon, that it can't do anything without the help of the US. So it once again looks like a weak country. And, it's like, which is it? Is Israel an all-powerful country that can bomb everyone to smithereens constantly and constantly win, and no one can fight back and win? Or is Israel the country that's so weak that a bunch of savages who apparently everything they do is ineffectual, whether it's their missile strikes or their resistance to stave off an invasion, who are all under sanction and who are working with minimal technology compared to what the Israelis have, are able to push back against this settler colony that is just, as you said, not sustainable? I mean, it all remains to be seen, but in the long term, in spite of all this destruction that Israel's able to cause, I don't think Israel can win either.
No, I think it's a good point. I mean, and listen, you mentioned at the top this whole idea that the thing was failed. When it first was happening, the Iranian strikes, the Israeli media was saying there was 400 projectiles. I don't know how true any of that is, but I assume that's their record of failure, that they shot down a number of them. But it's almost like they really do think we're that stupid, as if people could not see on TV the Iron Dome massively failing, these rockets hitting. We're seeing some satellite images that are emerging that show that at some of the air bases there were some serious damage, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist, I guess no pun intended, to get a sense that obviously some damage was done and some hits were made. In the context of that, there's a lot of different points and pieces that need to be made here. But I just, maybe the overall point I'm trying to make here, Rania, is with the assassination of Nasrallah, it was proven that Israel obviously has spent a lot of time developing an extraordinarily capable intelligence apparatus that was able to find him and deploy a massive amount of violence, 85 bunker buster bombs all at once, in order to kill Hassan Nasrallah. But the flip side of that is everyone then says, and everyone rushes to say anytime Israel does anything, look at how great they are, look at how good their intelligence is, look at how good their weapons are. But let's just tick off a few things. I mean, the Iron Dome did not succeed. And that also, by the way, was with help from the United States, help from Jordan, help from other countries still trying to shoot down these projectiles by using a combination of ballistic missiles and what appears to be perhaps some cyber attacks on their civil defenses. They showed that, and this is something anyone who knows about aerial defense knows in general, that the ability to overwhelm the Israeli aerial defenses is something that the Iranians have. And quite frankly, they chose to target military bases, but had they chose to target civilian areas, a lot of people would have died. And I think that speaks very much to this idea of the omnipotence of the Israeli military. The same thing can be said of what we've seen so far from the fighting in South Lebanon. Every single incursion seems to be being met with, significant force. Now, of course, these seem to be sort of probing things from Israel. They don't seem to be one big thrust. But the whole reason Israel's probing to see what happens is they're worried that they might get beat if they get in there. So they're trying to figure out what's going on. And Hezbollah seems to know where they are and where they're coming from, and to be able to then communicate that and move their soldiers around, which means despite the killing of all of their leaders, so many of their leaders, their basic command and control and their basic system of fighting back seems to be basically intact, which also goes to this whole idea of this Israeli omnipotence. And, people always say, maybe think I bring it back to South Africa too much, and maybe I do, but this was the same context. Everyone always said that the South African military was so good and that the ANC could never match them and that these other African states could never stand up to them. But it turns out that omnipotence and that, invincibility was not true. And I think what we've seen from the Iranian missile attack and the sort of initial elements of the invasion, and let's see how it goes. Of course, the things can always go a lot of different ways. I'm not being predictive, but we have seen that this sort of omnipotent invincibility has been punctured again and again, quite frankly, from October 7th. I woke up this morning and there were some rockets being fired outside of Gaza into Israel. So 11 months into it, They've massacred 42,000 people. They claim that they've destroyed all of Hamas, and they're still firing rockets, still blowing up tanks, still fighting in the north, which is supposedly totally controlled by Israel. And, so ultimately, I think this is an important factor of the sort of propaganda element of what we're seeing happen here is this. And I think Israel is aware of this. I really do. And I think that's partially why they want to hit hard everywhere all at once, because they themselves recognize they are not invincible. They are not omnipotent. They're surrounded by like a billion people who hate what they stand for and want to see something totally different in the region. And there's a lot of different visions for what that could look like. And so they know they better fight now. Because the longer they wait, the less likely they are to be able to succeed or by themselves anytime. So anyway, I just think that's another important point when we have all this, this attack failed, blah, 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 blah. I think it exposed something very important about the limits of Israeli power. And of course, they got a lot of military power, but it's got limits to it, and it's not what it's being made out to be in the Financial Times or wherever they're doing these little laudatory articles about how Israel knows and does everything.
Indeed. No, I think that's really well said. And, they'll just bold. Israel's so bold and ingenious and innovative. They're like entrepreneurs at killing.
Yeah.
And I just, one last thing I want to add is
they are. They have all the top security companies in the world. All the top security companies, private security companies.
They are good at killing.
That's what they do. That's their business.
I will give them that. I mean, who wants to be known for being good at killing? I guess they do. And that's the one last point I'll make is I just thought it was so interesting that there were so many pundit types who couldn't imagine like any scenario of Iran being effective against Israel with this missile strike. They couldn't even think of it that way because they didn't kill anyone.
Yeah, that's Israel. A great point.
So it's like their measuring stick for success, military success and effectiveness, and this is from American think tankers and American military people, is how many civilians did you massacre? Like it's now looked at as, Israel's winning in Gaza because it's destroying. Israel's winning in Lebanon because it's killing. Like, oh wow, dropping 85 bunker buster bombs and turning 6 residential buildings to ash. What an ingenious military success. It's like, that is actually not, that's a horrible crime, but a military success? What are your military goals at the end of the day? I just want to run through them real quick. The hostages, to return the hostages, which I guess we have to return the hostages from apparently Lebanon now, because no one's even talking about the hostages anymore, right? But return the hostages hasn't accomplished that. To disarm and disband and basically destroy Hamas in Gaza, that hasn't happened in a year. We're reaching a year point of genociding in Gaza. Hamas still exists. It's still fighting. It's still putting out videos showing them shame Israeli military tanks. And now it's become to return the residents to the north, which they've actually just expanded the circle of displacement in Israel because now more is being fired at. So that's not happening. And now they've come up with an even crazier military objective, which is to destroy and disarm Hezbollah, which is just never going to happen. Like, no matter how much destruction they inflict on Lebanon, and it really pains me to watch that. I'm like having a panic attack every single night as I watch my country and my city of Beirut be slowly destroyed by the Israelis. Doesn't matter how much destruction you inflict. Hezbollah is still going to be there and is still going to fight. So at the end of the day, they have achieved none of their military objectives, and they're not going to. They're just inflicting destruction. And that's what the U.S. and Israel see as victories, is killing people. It's unbelievable.
It is.
The hubris and the arrogance.